Yes, indeed. If you check the time on the wall, it is indeed the only time that matters. Biden time, welcome. We are back one last time for 2022. Very excited to go through the top stories of 2022, although some of them might be in the bottoms of our heart. I am Christian Bladt, as always, joined by the one, the only, the S-Man 80, Scott Moore. Hello, sir.
Hello, it's great to be here.
And the Tamra who puts the hay in Hey Tamra. Tamra Brown, hello, how are you?
You're okay. You're not writing my biographies. Hello,
All right,
Christian.
let me
Thanks
rip
for
those
having
up.
me.
These are all the I'm writing intros for you for eventual talk show appearances. And you know what? It's a Christmas miracle. Joining us in the live chat is our friend Storage Yard resident. We haven't
Wow.
done this show in like 6 weeks. I only posted this, I think, earlier today. I posted the link.
Of all the
And there
juke
he is.
joints and all the internets,
I'm
there he
so
is.
excited that you're here, Storage Yard resident. I appreciate your dedication to us. I appreciate your dedication to three people who you agree on so little about. But that, your dedication to us is it warms the heart. So I wanted to start off talking about what each of us feel. It's going to be tough to quantify, and we can mix and match and reseed some of these as we go throughout this next hour. What we feel like some of the biggest stories are. They can be, you know, feel good stories, but most are going to be the opposite of that. So, but I wanted to, I'm going to leave it open, whichever one of you wants to jump in first with what comes to mind. I don't want to put pressure on either of you to be first. So, who'd like to go first?
Gosh, it's a tough one. It really, really is, because it's like just trying to think of all the different things. I mean, I could just say the obvious thing is the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, because I think that was a trickle-down effect that changed midterms and a lot of other things beyond that. But there's so many other stories, but that's the one that just pops in my head, because I think it really just sort of changed the trajectory of the remaining second half of the year.
I think that that is the one that garnered the strongest reactions, because go ahead, Tamra. Yeah,
I was going to say, well, because what I was thinking was, the midterms, and that there was not this big red wave that both parties were expecting. So I would say that the results of the midterms and the results of the Georgia runoff, and the way that, Trump endorsed candidates just did not have the momentum that we thought they did a year ago. And so much of that is due to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So,
yeah, no, I mean, I think
right, Scott, as usual.
To both of your points, I think a lot of things stem from that, and I think that there were such strong, very emotional reactions. Obviously, let's look at the other side of it. You have people who feel as though it was a great step for the unborn. You have the pro-life movement that, for decades, they hold that annual event where they're basically praying for it. And so, this was basically something that they wanted. But then what I think most of us know, people that had the reaction of, it was very upsetting. And, I mean, I think regardless of what state people live in, it always starts to turn into concern that there would be any kind of federal legislation. And we talked plenty about this. I mean, we did a whole show after that happened. But, I think that so much comes from that. And, I think that we'll talk about a lot of things that led to some sleepless nights for people throughout the country and around the world. But I think the overturning Roe v. Wade was way up there. And, I think that for people who are noticing the background behind us, we have the top secret classified documents that were scattered around Mar-a-Lago, which was a huge story. I still don't quite. It's one of those ones where you're like, they're still working on that, right? What are we finding out from that? You know, it's like it's been left open ended. It's like it's not as big of a mystery as that. That terrible story about the shooting at the concert in Las Vegas, where you just stopped hearing about that guy. And you start to wonder every once in a while, like, did I just forget what happened in that story? And the documents in Mar-a-Lago, it's like, okay, so where are they? What are they looking for? And I mean, I think we talked about it on the show. My favorite theory was that the reason that they buried his ex-wife, Ivana Trump, at Mar-a-Lago was so that they could fill her coffin with documents. And I mean, it's horrific that it's even a possibility, but it's like, man, if that's a twist or a turn in, like an Agatha Christie mystery, you're like, wow, that's really smart. So I mean, that's that one is it's just sort of fascinating, the implications of, I went home with a bunch of stuff from my office. Look, I think we've all found ourselves leaving a job that maybe under good terms, maybe not. Maybe we took some staplers and some Scotch tape dispensers, but I don't know that I ever would have been like, what is the most valuable items I can find here in the job site? Tamara, did you ever Tamara, did you ever steal your boss's car keys on the way out? Or
I did, and I buried them with Ivana Trump, so he's never getting those back.
Right.
I mean, that theory, though, it is very funny. And certainly a good headline. Like, it's just so silly, because if you're gonna, like, why go to that trouble? Just throw them in a fire, throw them,
right, exactly.
Put them in the oven. Like, that's not what happened to them, although it is a very funny idea. I was just gonna say, like, both of us started off the show going like, oh, what was the big, well, we all, trying to remember what happened this year. Yeah. And then as we've been talking, I've been trying to think like, okay, wow, we've got the shooting in Uvalde, Texas. We've got the release of Adnan Syed, which, unless you're a fan of the Serial podcast, you probably have no idea who that is. The World Cup. We've got the stepping down of Nancy Pelosi, the attack on her husband. It really has been. Any other year, this would be a crazy year, but just in terms of what we're coming off of, and how crazy everything has been through 2020, 2021 especially, but really since 2016, and the norm, what is the norm has changed. It's really interesting how so much really monumental stuff happened this year, and it almost kind of feels like it's been a quiet year.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, if you were to take some of the big things that happened this year, and if you were to put them in a different year, it's like, hands down, that's the biggest story of the year. It's very difficult to kind of quantify, and look, and Tamara, you referenced the last 2 years, and we've been doing a version of this show over the course of that time. And as we're here at the end of 2022, by no means has COVID-19 gone away in the literal sense. People are still getting it. People are still worried about it, but people are kind of not talking about it in the same way. There's so far beyond the fatigue of it. Now it's like, I mean, it's basically one of those ones. Oh, if you test positive, just wash your hands after. Could you do that? It's almost gotten to that point,
Yeah. A friend of mine who is one of them, it continues to be such an ongoing frustration, because I feel like I said when we would record an episode, in the midst of the 2020 lockdown. And I remember always saying, like, it's just so interesting, because even people who generally agree with you, we all kind of have such like we're just analyzing the way everybody's handling the pandemic, and nobody seems to be doing it right. Even people that are pretty much doing the same thing as us, you know, in the heavy days of lockdown. It's just like people were just like, I cannot believe that you're even going to the grocery store, not ordering groceries. But then, you know, they would go and walk their dog and bring it to a dog park or something like that. Like they were always like, anyway. So what I was about to say is that, so a friend of mine who now is still one of the people who is always very like, so very vocal about like, oh, you're going to that party? No, I'm still not doing indoor events. And like very vocal about, I don't do, you know, here's what I do. I'm very, like letting people know that she's very cautious, which is fine. But also there's not a consistency to this person's caution. And then also she just tested positive for COVID. And when she let me know, I was like, oh, okay. So were you boosted this year? And she says, no, she didn't get a booster this year. And I was like, I can't believe that somebody who is so vocally like still, you know, trying to, you know, remind people that we are still in the midst of a pandemic hasn't even been boosted this year. And I'm just still in that phase where I like have to stop myself from like judging everybody and then the way that they're handling things. Because it's just still,
no, I mean, I think that's, I think the most consistent thing as it relates to the pandemic is just the rampant inconsistencies, you know. It's look, I got a third shot, and I think that I probably wasn't going to get the fourth one, but at the end of the year, I'm going to Scott's home state of Florida, and I just feel like every inch of that state is equipped with hot and cold running COVID. So I was like, you know what, let me just go ahead and get the extra one. But I wanted to get it as close to Christmas as possible, because I was like, I don't know, you hear that the fourth shot is good for like, you know, a couple of hours. No, but it's like less than a month and it's at peak efficiency. So, and I had to cancel my trip to China because I was only going for zero COVID, and now forget it. But you know, and look, I think that most people even are at the point, and Tamra, I know plenty of people that would match the description of the person you're talking about.
Same.
Where
I do too.
the people that are the most vocal about, well, I don't do this, I don't do that, but then it's like, oh yeah, but I had to go to Toronto for a work trip, you know, and I'm like, you flew there, you know, and it's like, all right, I mean, look, it's fine if people fly places, but it's just like everybody's willing to make exceptions at this point.
Exactly.
You know,
yeah.
I mean,
I'm not doing indoors until there's something that I want to do indoors.
Which, you know, people in the rest of the country aren't going to want to hear about this. But for LA, it has been so cold the last 2 months that if people were only willing to, actually, we went to a Christmas party that was entirely outdoors, and it was entirely too cold for it. And I was just like, oh, but their house is so nice. Like, can we just go into for like eating, and then we go outside and mingle? No, they didn't even have heat lamps, you know.
Oh,
I don't know. You seem to be finding the same thing as it relates to that, Scott. And you know, by the way, COVID is like, if we were ranking stories and doing like a top 20, I don't even know that COVID would be on it this year. You know,
no, because we've kind of gone back to operating on. We're just living with it, which I said like a year ago, that's what it was going to be. We were just going to have to live with it and move on and do what we need to do. So for the most part, you know, most people have, but I still run across the same thing that Tamra was saying. I ran into somebody last week that I haven't seen in a while, and they wanted to eat outside. And it was the same thing. It was a very blustery day. I was like, okay, like, sure. I mean, I guess you know, so I get it to some degree, but it's also like, okay, at some point, if you're going to go back out, you're going to have to come across things and do things that, you know, otherwise you're going to have to be a complete recluse, which is sad. So, yeah, I get it. But I also, like you said, I see a lot of people that do that, and then they have a lot of different little reasons onto why they can do other things when it comes to it. So,
yeah,
absolutely.
We're at the point in the pandemic where my children are being invited to birthday parties at Chuck E. Cheese, which is something that even a year ago, excuse me, even a year ago you couldn't even imagine. Like, how are you trying to get us to go to Chuck E. Cheese? But they don't have the ball pit anymore. So I think that if we've
Wait, they
gotten
don't. What do they have there now?
well, mostly video games actually, but if we've gotten anything out of the pandemic, it's the abolishing the ball pit.
Well, that thing is nasty anyways. Just like when you
Yeah.
think about blowing candles on a cake and then cutting up the cake for everybody, it's kind of a nasty. I've always thought that was kind of nasty anyways. It's like, ugh.
Our pal Sam Whitfield says it's nice that the flu is back this year. It seems like there's a lot more focus on the flu.
I was just going to say, Christian, with your kids, I was just hearing how RSV is rampant. So like obviously be cautious of COVID, but there's just, so many other things right now that are swirling.
Yeah, no, I know there's look, the media loves when they can come up with a phrase like the triple demic.
Yeah.
That it's flu, COVID, and RSV. And I don't know, knock on wood. I mean, my kids were, a little under the weather for like weeks at a time. And like so much so I couldn't get them their flu shots when I wanted to, like, because they weren't well enough for them, So I'm like, all right, I hope that they had their stint. But I mean, look, we're going to come back from Florida with strains of things we've never heard of, Scott's, he's from the soil there, so he'll be fine. But
gator virus, you got that. You're getting those gator scales.
That's right.
And Jacob Downey, I love you in the chat. And you went so far with such a bad joke that I'm going to go ahead and put my Aunt Maxine used to sell vacuums. We call her Aunt Vaccine. All right. Thank you. Jacob, you're there and you keep commenting. So of course I'm going to bring you up. Although there is that one person that sometimes will comment through the entire show, and I'll accidentally forget to post their comments. And now if they're there, they'll start chiming in. Anyway, so, we've touched on a few different things. But I think that, the last show we did was maybe the day after the election. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't have all the results. And the one thing that we saw incorrectly in that moment was a bit of a bummer that Lauren Boebert, is it Boebert or Bobbert? I don't even know. Anyway, she held on to her seat. And at the time we did the show, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe she lost. But, I mean, you look around and there's a lot of like, I can't believe how much money Carrie Lake spent on camera filters, and it still didn't work for her. The amount of Vaseline spread on camera lenses.
Well, I mean, and even in Los Angeles, a billionaire ran for mayor and lost. Yeah. And that's amazing that somebody can first of all, the fact that somebody is able to spend $100 million on a campaign is proof that billionaires need to be taxed more. You should not have that much expendable income. And but it's celebrated that somebody can have that much wealth put into a campaign and still lose. But also, points to the problems.
I think that it should be like gambling. If you put all that money up into a campaign and you lose, then your tax rate goes up to like 90%. So it's like you're going to spend, like Bloomberg, how much money did he spend to run for president? Very poorly run for president, and it was like, all right, so, my kids are going to inherit like one less Cayman Island or whatever, you know what I mean? It really wasn't going to matter, but it was just like, it was still an obscene amount of money. And yeah, I mean, I think that that was kind of surprising because Caruso here in LA, I mean, eventually drummed up some celebrity support, and then sometimes that makes enough of the difference. Yes. I mean, there's a reason the Terminator was our governor, so, and it's but I think we saw a lot of that. You saw people spending money. You saw some of those slam dunk candidates that, and I think that the big takeaway is that it doesn't necessarily tell you what Trump as a national candidate would be, but his seal of approval does not help. And in fact, it probably hurts. And, it's like, it's a lot of the, we talked a lot the day after the election, the strength of those candidates. And I mean, I think that Herschel Walker is probably the worst candidate that I remember, at least on a big, on a big stage like that in my lifetime, and keeping in mind, I posted this on Twitter, keeping in mind that I set up radio interviews for Christine O'Donnell, who ran in Delaware, and she had a campaign commercial that started off explaining, "I am not a witch."
Yeah.
I wish this was made up.
Yep.
But Sam in the chat, I know will remember that she did like a 90-second radio interview. But and so it was just like, in some of these races, you're just like, yeah, I feel like, it's Georgia. You feel like a Republican could have won a runoff. And I don't know. Fetterman in Pennsylvania, there were health issues. He wasn't the best candidate, but then it was like, well, you ran Dr. Oz against him. So what do you expect? And I think that the strength of candidate mixed with having honestly the stink of Trump on it, it was just a bad combination, and what was the most surprising for you, Scott, in terms of, let's say, if you can isolate one of the sort of the Trump disciples, is there somebody that you actually thought was going to win and then they didn't? There's some where you're like, it could have gone either way because the polling was so close, the results were so close. The Fetterman Dr. Oz race was fairly close, but was there one that outright surprised you?
I think the one that actually surprised me the most was probably Kari Lake and Katie Hobbs, because it seemed like Kari Lake was very close the whole time, and the fact that Katie Hobbs made the determination not to have any debate with her, didn't really campaign. I really thought that one was one where I was like, ooh, that could, like, I think I was quite surprised to see as many Democrats win some of those races. I wasn't surprised about Pennsylvania. I always thought that Fetterman was ahead, and we saw it tighten. So I wasn't surprised by that. I think, like, again, it's crazy enough to say, but I agree with Mitch McConnell where it's about candidate quality, because there was a very good opportunity, even with Roe v. Wade being overturned, for the Republicans to have taken back the Senate like they did with the House. They could have very easily, because it was 50-50. If they had a good candidates in Pennsylvania, if they had a good candidate, in Georgia, if they had a good candidate in Nevada, they could have very easily won 2 of those 3 states and taken back the majority of the Senate. So it really does come down to candidate quality. And I think on the flip side, the surprise was Ron Johnson winning in Wisconsin, because I really thought, he was more of a moderate, and then he took that far right kind of Trumpian turn. And I think the other big surprise was just seeing the ticket splitting that we saw in so many races again, because that sort of had gone away in recent years, and it came back in a very dramatic way when you look at a lot of these races this year. And I think that was my other bigger surprise that I was not expecting. I was not expecting to see Wisconsin split, New Hampshire split, Georgia split, Nevada split. They elected a Republican governor, and kicked out their incumbent Democratic governor, but yet they went for Democratic senators. So, and Kansas, same thing, Republican senator kept their Democratic governor. So I think that, to me, was the biggest takeaway, to see so much ticket splitting across the board in so many different states this year, which was quite fascinating, actually. And a lot of that had to do with those Trump candidates.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's how you end up with ticket splitting, when you have somebody on your ticket that's just so bad. Look, I think that, even, I guess there's another way to sort of split the tickets, which is, if somebody is, toe the line Democrat, maybe they would never vote for Republican, but there could be a Democratic candidate that's so bad, you're like, I can't vote for anybody. I'm gonna write in Scott Moore, which we probably should all do. Or if Scott, if you don't want to serve, I'll write in our friend Drexel Hurd. I'll write him in. I think he's got more suits than you do, so I think he's ready. But and I do think, I think that there's just a lot of dissatisfaction, and there was, Tamara, you mentioned it before, there was supposed to be this red wave, and yes, Republicans have a majority in the House, but it's 5 seats, right?
It's not what
I
they were
stopped.
expecting.
Yeah.
And for a Scott, when was the last time that the opposing party maintained, like, usually there's the Congress flips when for whatever the midterm of whatever party is in power.
2002, so it's been 20 years, but the last time that we actually had a incumbent president pick up seats in the Senate and pick up governorships, you have to go all the way back to 1934. Because that's the fascinating thing too, is not only did they pick up a seat in the Senate, but also they picked up more Democratic governorships as well. We saw a lot of Republicans were termed out, obviously, and you had Republicans that were very moderate, like we've talked about in New England and stuff. You go back to the Rockefeller Republican type thing where you have, Chris Sununu won re-election, New Hampshire governor, Vermont governor. And then you see in Massachusetts that Charlie Baker, he was term limited, and he was a very popular Republican governor in Massachusetts, but got replaced by Democrat. Same thing in Maryland. Larry Hogan's very popular Republican governor who was able to kind of cross the line in a blue state, was replaced by a Democrat. And then you saw places like Michigan pick up a trifecta, where all the state houses now are Democratic again. So you have all 3 branches of government, Michigan, Democratic for the first time since 1984. You saw Pennsylvania, you saw it happen in Minnesota, all Democratic control now in those states. And it's a very real thing during a president's first midterm to have that, especially when you have a lot of other cross currents with inflation and all the other things that were sort of working against that this year, which goes back to the top of our story talking about Roe v. Wade, because it sort of became that whole trickle down effect, which again politically affected other things down the line, like all the states that went out, and Republican states like Kansas likely reelected their Democratic governor because of support of people that came out to vote to protect, the abortion rights and things like that. And it went to the end of the year to get Congress to protect marriage equality and things like that may not have been on the top of the list for Congress to do if it wasn't for that. So it became a bigger trickle down effect that really affected everything else. Because I do think that if Roe v. Wade had not happened and being overturned, that we could be looking more at a red wave, because a lot of people would have been sitting back, and that red wave would have occurred for sure.
And that goes to show that despite the massive divide between right and left, it still really comes down to issues. It still really comes down to the Republican voters in Florida that are, they want a higher minimum wage, or the Republican voters in Kansas that are pro choice, or, like it comes down to a specific issue rather than, just the lining themselves with the party. I have a question for Scott, though, because for years he's said that as a warning to the Republican Party, like look at the fate of the Republican Party in California, and look at that's where you said that you think the Republican Party federally was headed. So where do you think at this point, does that still ring true?
No, I do think that. I mean, I think they're starting to come around about Trump, because we've talked about this too for years, and I said he'll never be president again. And I think you see that a lot of people are coming around to it within the Republican Party, of the fact that he has dragged the party down. And I think that anti-democratic move has not been popular either, because that was the other thing that I think surprised me too, was the fact that those candidates that were 2020 deniers did not win across the board in most states. And that was a great relief as well. So I mean, that's the thing is that the Republicans really they would become more of a regional party in the South and rural Mountain West, and they will lose a lot of these other areas if they don't change. But the surprising thing, I think that did surprise me from the takeaway from the election, was the fact that we have a House majority really comes down to New York and California, and for Republicans, which is the ironic thing. So a lot of the states that had all, Democratic control were the ones that basically had the flips with some of those seats, especially in New York State. But you saw in California, a lot of the Republican incumbents won, and there were a couple pickups of Republicans in California as well. So I do think that was another interesting takeaway, that even though, you know, the Republican Party as a whole is becoming more regionalized, we did see some of those pickups actually occur in the Democratic controlled states, because a lot of Republican controlled states could kind of lash out, but Democratic ones, you know, who were wanting that change, basically had full Democratic control from the federal to the state to the local, ended up going for some of those Republican congressional districts flipped. So that was interesting.
Well, you referenced the waning influence of former President Donald Trump, and I think it's important to talk about what has been a late entry for favorite story of 2022, and I do mean favorite. It was within the last week. Yeah, it was last Thursday, I think. Former President Trump was teasing a major announcement. And people were wondering if it was possibly a running mate. You know, he was going to announce a running mate, and you know, Carrie Lake was one of those possible contenders. And instead, what it turned out was the thing that made even Steve Bannon say that he might have to wash his hands of the whole thing. The NFT Trump digital trading cards, where it's action shots of Trump as a superhero, as a golfer, multiple superheroes. Part of me wants to go through the whole list, but
Oh my God.
I don't know. I already have to wear reading glasses now.
Trump is the purple eggplant, or was that? No, I'm just imagining that one. Maybe
you're
the next round.
You're imagining that one. Well, there was one where he was like George Washington crossing the Potomac.
The Delaware, yeah.
And they sold out. Didn't they sell out?
They did.
About $99. And there's our pal Sam Whitfield just giving us the eye roll.
You got his.
By the way, I can't believe I just said I can't believe I just said Washington crossing the Potomac. So thank you, Scott, for making me not look like an idiot. But anyway, it's not going to take away the fun that I had when I saw the rollout. I think that's one of those where you're like, oh man, the gang at the Onion has really outdone themselves. And, you know, you see, because I think I saw it, you know, my early morning scroll through social media, and then I'm like, oh my God, this is real. And yes, they did sell out, so that'll tell you something.
But what was the threshold, though? That's what I say when someone says it sold out, like, you know,
yeah, were there 500?
Right?
You know,
like, how many were there really?
Card,
Come on.
Yeah.
There were. Let's see, they were going for $100 each, because I think he made something like, I think there might have been a 10,000 of them. I know he made.
I'm actually checking.
I know he made over $1 million.
Yeah. Well, $1 million. But yeah. So, and you know,
$1 million. I mean, that for him, that means a lot right now. He needs that.
He needs it.
And Sam says that he also thought it was a parody at first. Storage Yard wants to know, how many NFT cards did I buy? I'm gonna have to ask that question right back at you, Storage Yard President. Did you buy any? I know what a fan you are of former President Trump. That you know, whatever story we're talking about when we do this show, you usually will highlight a speech that he gave recently that you feel stands out and deserves some attention. So did you buy any NFT cards? And I'm going to ask both Scott and Tamra, is there anyone who could unveil a line of NFT trading cards where you'd think for even a moment, oh, maybe I want to buy that? It doesn't have to be political. It could be your favorite musician. It could be anyone, somebody you admire. It could be literally anyone. I like, first of all, if my kids asked for them, I'd be like, no, not for $99. If they were like, you know, $2, $3, yeah, I'd probably get something dumb like that for my kids. But for myself, adults buying Donald Trump digital trading cards. And by the way, hat tip to you, Storage Yard Resident. He did not. But Sam says his co-host does know a guy who bought one. He's like, it's not me, though. I believe you, Sam. But Sam, let me ask you, would you buy a Ron DeSantis digital trading card? That's the question. But I don't know. I don't know that there's really an answer to what I posed to Scott and Tamra. I can't imagine that there's any scenario where I'd buy digital trading cards of anything.
It's an interesting thing because I guess it's purely for an investment. But if that's the case, then why do they make this design? Because when people buy things, like if he were selling merch, like more MAGA merch, people want to buy it because they want to brand themselves. They want to wear the MAGA hat. They want to wear the MAGA shirt. They want the bumper stickers. People want to brand themselves with what team that they're on. So, but these NFT things, they're only for you can't wear it, you can't show it off in any way. So like all it's doing is, I guess they're saying, and purchasing one was not going to campaign. It was specifically stated that this is a different thing. You're not supporting his campaign, his reelection campaign. So I guess if somebody wanted to purchase one, it's just they're looking at it as an investment, and they're looking at it as just wanting to support, just like personally support him, which is
they're supporting his legal defense fund.
Because you're clearly a person who truly does believe that this is a successful businessman, but yet still you want to give him your money. So
I mean, the only thing I could say is I could understand it in the sense of, like you said, it's just not my thing. I have a lot of friends and family and stuff that are, big into sports memorabilia and collect, you could see baseball cards or other sports that, so I could see people being interested in it. And the NFT is another outlet for that kind of, keeping memorabilia kind of thing. It's just not my thing, but I could understand people being interested in that regardless if it's Donald Trump or somebody else. I just found the actual ones just comical, it's just that, just the various different, he's an astronaut, all the stuff that just doesn't seem real. But as far as being into that, I can see it. I get it. It's just would not be something that I would personally, for anybody that I could think of, that I would go to. But I could see in a, like I said, especially in the sports world or other things where people are.
Yeah, but I mean, sports memorabilia or like baseball cards, it's like an actual physical card you can have, or I can, I can have this, signed Clayton Kershaw jersey and put it up on my wall.
Sure, yeah,
but this is like, this is a digital trading card that looks like this. It's Donald Trump as the Statue of Liberty, which is, and then I guess that they were the resale market. Some of them went as high as $44,000, but
I mean, look, I get it from a virtual. I get it, but again, it's not my thing. But I could, and you're right. There's something about the tactile nature of something, the actual having something, which again, it kind of goes back to anything else, like cryptocurrency and other things that you don't physically. I mean, you can get a Bitcoin, but that you can physically take is a weird concept, and I don't get it. My brother got into NFTs for a while and everything, but I can understand, like a baseball card, I can understand that part of it.
I'm with you in the sense that in general, digital collectibles are just not my thing, but I do understand that they exist. Sam agrees. He says lots of artists sell NFTs to their pieces virtually. Storage Yard Resident has a salient point. Those NFT cards kept President Trump in the news. Yes. If his announcement had been, something more standard political, my chief of staff for my second term is going to be the Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, that would have, been gotten less attention than the digital trading cards. But so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just like at this point, I think that's one of the big stories of 2022. It's not any of these individual Trump stories. Well, it's just the fact of like where he is now at the end of the year compared to where he was a year ago, compared to where he was 2 years ago, where he was, basically trying to steal a second term. That's where he was 2 years ago.
Well, I think this has been a very bad year for him, because you're seeing at the end of it where his tax returns are going to become public. You have the January 6th committee, even though it has no teeth, basically saying that a former president should be in for some crimes, prosecuted and indicted for crimes. I mean, that's mind-blowing to think where the year began or where he was literally 2 years ago, to see that, and then to see all of his or most of his preferred candidates lose. And you see Ron DeSantis becoming a very potential big rival that could topple him over. I mean, it's still very early, and that's part of the reason why I think Ron DeSantis doesn't want to run yet anyways. You don't want to peak as a front runner too soon, and we've seen that happen on previous, candidates on both sides. But
by the way, speaking of Ron DeSantis, did you see that Mike Lindell is now investigating the fact that he feels like Ron DeSantis actually did not win by the margin that he says?
I mean, it is the most comical thing. I did see that right before we came on, actually, and I just thought,
I saw it just a little while ago.
It was I was like, really? There's just no words. I mean,
no, I know. And then with him, it always goes back to like somebody needs to pull him aside and give him the phrase about Trump is he's just not that into you. Trump doesn't actually like you that much. The amount of effort you put in trying to be his friend. Anyway, I'm sorry, but you mentioned DeSantis, and I mean, I think that his ascent is kind of infuriating to Team Trump, because we had Trump, teasing the fact that he's like, oh, I know things about Ron DeSantis, and his nickname game has really degraded over the last couple of years. Ron DeSanctimonious. I was like, the word doesn't even mean what I think you think it means. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't think you get what that word means. It's like, it's not the kind of insult you're looking for,
right?
Just something, it was like the older days. It was simpler when you said Rosie O'Donnell's a fat pig. All right, that's a very rude thing to say, but we get it. All right. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. I don't know, Tamara, if you hear if you have any of your vast network of people throughout the country, if you have people that were a little bit more Team Trump. I feel like you've alluded to knowing people that were like supporters in some way, but I feel like, people aren't coming around to, being Democrats. I think you're just getting a lot more complacency amongst Republicans, because they're like, oh, I liked Trump, but I don't like him anymore. And I don't like anybody else. They're not like, they don't suddenly like Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy,
I mean, I think that I think that people who are diehard Team Trump aren't dialed in enough to know who Kevin McCarthy is. They only know Kevin McCarthy as far as saying when Trump might mention him. And then, there's so many people who would always say like, well, I don't like him and I don't like what he says, but that, but they would, certainly vote for him. But I think those are the people that are they are now finding that they feel more comfortable with DeSantis and, maybe whatever other candidate might come into the spotlight within the next year. But yeah, I mean, I've always said I don't know too many Republicans. I only, I've always worked with a veterans organization, that that's my only like interaction with Republicans, and at this point, I feel like a lot of Republicans don't want to talk about things, and I think that's very telling too, because they don't want to get into a conversation about like, it's becoming apparent that Trump his numbers are tanking, and he's not going to be able to win a presidential campaign, and those things that if anybody supported him at any level, whether they held their nose and voted for him or whether they were full on hat, T-shirts and bumper stickers, they don't want to admit that he's circling the drain right now.
Right. Even if they were somebody who a year ago might have bought digital trading cards, now they're like, no, well, now it's a crazy idea.
I was going to say I have a lot of Republican friends and family, and the interesting thing was I didn't really have maybe one or two that had voted or were interested in Trump the first time around. But I find it interesting because it kind of is both sides. And I crack up because there was, SNL is not that great this season because everyone's left, but there was that great Halloween one with the election. short about, basically, it's kind of the same problem on the Democratic side with Biden, where so many people are so, like, even me thinking about Biden running again and having to go do a debate or something at 82 years old, and you have someone like Ron DeSantis now instead of Trump, or someone that's like half his age, makes me really nervous. So you can see it on both sides, where there's some people are like, do we really want Biden to run again? And that same kind of thing. And you'll have a lot of people that are like, so, and I think it'll be fascinating to see. I think now coming out of these midterms,
I don't think anybody wants Biden to run again. Like, I don't think
it's that kind of on the Republicans with Trump, because I saw after the midterms a lot of people that might have been like, if the midterms are good, a lot of the Republican people I follow on Twitter might have, and that I know personally, might have been on Team Trump still, but they were all from that point on were like, somebody else. Even though they were not big, passionate Trump supporters, they were very vocal about it needing to be someone else. And on the flip side, I've seen a lot of that with Biden too, though not as much now after the midterms. And I feel that he has now come out of this feeling a lot more confident in being able to come back and run for re-election. I'm sure at the start of the new year, he's going to announce, but I find it really fascinating, because I think it puts Democrats, much like Republicans, having the consternation of Trump being there. Democrats are going to have the same thing too now with Biden, and like, how do they feel? And is there anybody else? And I think the good thing about the midterms, where we have a lot more Democratic potential future office holders at higher level, including Raphael Warnock, but you think about Michigan governor, you think about Maryland governor, you think about other candidates now that have won and have an opportunity now for power to go to a higher elected office in the future. But I think that's going to be something that's also going to give Democrats a lot of heartburn now too, much like Trump will be for Republicans.
Well, yeah, and look, I think that Storage Yard resident just simply asked the question: should Joe Biden run in 2024? And I think that the mixed blessing of the midterms is that if it had been just devastating, if Republicans had gotten to like 60 seats and they had like a 25 seat lead in the majority in the House, then it would have been like, dude, you can't run again. And he'd probably be like, yeah, obviously I can't. I don't know what that solution is. But now the idea is just like, well, we got through that. And, are they voting for me, or are they voting for the little D in the parentheses next to my name? Well, sir, it's a capital D. Yeah, but you know what I mean. And, Sam says he shouldn't win, but Sam, you wouldn't want him to win even if he did. But I know what you're saying. But I
think every single Democrat would say he shouldn't run again. But the problem is we don't have anybody else. I mean, I
think that many Democrats would not say publicly. I think you have some who are just like, well, of course, if the president wants to run, he should, even though privately they'd be like, oh man, he can't win. He can't win this time. What were you going to say, Scott?
Do you two think people who like Democrats who feel that like, oh, Biden's gonna do it, he's got to go for it?
I don't know if it's that so much of people. I think they're kind of like most people are feeling it. And again, I don't want to come across as being ageist, but we see too many politicians who are there well past their time. And yes, someone in their 80s, it may be, and that's, I think, part of the issue. But I think for him, one, you have a hard time with being able to knock out an incumbent or run against an incumbent in the party. So that's going to be very challenging. And I think from his perspective, rightfully or wrongfully, is to come away to say, I am the only one that can win right now compared to the rest of the Democrats. I've proven it in 2020. And now we bucked the trend in 2022 with the midterm. So he's feeling that extra sense of confidence that he can still pull moderate Republicans that might be turned off by Trump. But what is going to be the challenge is, is somebody else that runs against him going to flip that switch? Yes, if Trump were to run again and win the nomination, I think very likely Trump would not win again. I think the Grover Cleveland analogy that happened when Grover Cleveland ran again is not something that's going to be replicated. It's a very unusual thing. And you see time and time again, candidates that ran again for presidency generally got less votes the second time around when that incumbent was running again. Like you talk about William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley, or Adlai Stevenson and Dwight Eisenhower. Those candidates that ran multiple times against the same candidate tended to do worse. The only, the only exception was Grover Cleveland. But I think that comparing Donald Trump to be able to do that, I mean, look, you can see like Theodore Roosevelt tried to run again in 1912, and that was a disaster. So I think, you know, for him to come back and run again to rematch with Biden, that's the only one where I could say Biden would probably be able to walk away with it, even though we have our concerns about him running again. But I think if there's any other people there, it's going to lead a lot of heartburn to see if he can actually pull it off at 82 years old.
I don't think Trump could even get the Republican nomination.
Yeah,
I think that there would be great resistance to it, but it just depends on what mechanisms he has in place to kind of, you know, buck that trend. I think that they would do everything they could to make it so he didn't. But yeah, I think that a Democrat can win the presidency in 2024. I think it's a very steep hill for Joe Biden to win in 2024. Donald Trump being the nominee does make it easier, but there's by no means is that a slam dunk. And, you know, look, we've mentioned in passing, you know, just the inflation, and that is something that even people who aren't political, they'll notice that, you know, I mean, gas prices have evened out somewhat, but they're still higher than people remember. I don't know about the rest of the country, but now when I go to the supermarket, they're telling you, you know, basically how many eggs you can buy. You can only buy 11. You can't even get an actual dozen. You have to leave one for your neighbor. No, but I mean, it's, you know, there's the supply chain issues that weren't being felt as much, you know, I don't know, a year or two ago. We're definitely seeing more of that. So it's very easy to point to things. And when Biden wasn't on the ballot for the midterms, you had a little bit of a cushion. But when he's the one who'd be actually running, you know, it would be the old Scott, the old, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? I think most people's answer would be like, oh, no, I am not.
Well,
You know?
I know, but I think that's been turned on its head, though, because you could say that about when Ronald Reagan in the early 80s, when inflation and everything was a lot higher, mortgage rates were higher, other things were higher. You look at Barack Obama, who won with 7% unemployment rate and won re-election. I mean, so I do, and again, we just went through midterms where that was front and center, and that didn't translate. So I do think there are differences there. I do think an incumbent, unless it's very detrimental, like or a terrible candidate like Trump, is always going to start with the upper hand for incumbency to be able to win, and especially a Democratic candidate. When you go back and look now over the past 30 plus years, the Democrats have won the popular vote every single time, except for the slim majority that George W. Bush won in 2004. It's just so the Democrat already kind of starts with a built-in a little bit structural, just popular vote-wise advantage. When you take everything else out of the equation, it's just going to be dependent on where's Joe Biden going to be health-wise at that point, and who's going to be his general election opponent, and is there going to be enough of a change there to some of these states like Georgia and Arizona and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where it's going to be down to a very thin majority of voters in each of those states that could just flip enough to be able to give that other opponent the opportunity to win. So that's the part it's going to be very interesting how that's going to shake out. But I think he does still come in with a built-in advantage, and he still can be able to pull some moderate Republican voters that might be turned off by a more extremist candidate. And if Ron DeSantis wants to take that Trump playbook too far on a national stage, it may not work for him. And like I said, his win in Florida was very unique. He was running against a former Republican governor who then became a Democrat in a state where the Democrats were not very motivated to vote for this former Republican governor as their candidate. So how will that translate on a national stage, and how much of a Trump pull, or how much will Democrats or moderate Republicans be less concerned with Ron DeSantis as a person and get that message across versus someone like Trump? And again, it may not even be Ron DeSantis, because you've seen a lot of front runners flame out before they get too far on the national stage. Right now, he's the candidate of the day, but that doesn't mean that that's going to take him all the way. So it'll be interesting to see who's that other person, and will that person be able to run with it in 2024 if it is in fact Joe Biden running again.
Right. And with regards to DeSantis's victory for governor, against Charlie Crist, Scott, as a Floridian, I feel like you'd probably be able to understand that people in that state have no respect for someone whose tan is unnatural. Somebody who gets a spray tan or a tanning bed, like Charlie Crist. I think that that probably is what did him in. If he had a natural beach tan, then maybe they would have voted for him.
I was going
That
to say Florida's
natural Mar-a-Lago glow.
yes, exactly.
Mar-a-Lago, yeah.
Well, I think Florida is very unique politically, anyways, and what happens there is very different than what happens in the rest of the country. Kind of like here, and for instance, in 2010, when they had the big red wave, it stopped in California. And Meg Whitman, again, another candidate who spent hundreds of millions of her own money, didn't even win in California, lost by a landslide. But they have, because a lot of Latino voters tended to trend more Republican over the past couple elections. In Florida, where in places like Nevada and Arizona, it was the opposite. And that's why those states have stayed or turned more blue. But Florida's kind of bucked that trend. And you've gotten a lot of conservative, even younger voters who are tending, especially Cubans and Venezuelans, that are tending to vote more Republican because they don't like socialism. Yeah. And that has kind of flipped the switch. And then you've also had a lot of retirees that have now come up from the Midwest that were Republican that have now settled in Florida, which has also added to a little bit of that Republican pad. So it's kind of a unique situation there where, you can't quite translate that to the national stage. And not to put anything against Ron DeSantis's win, because it was massive. Any way you slice it, it was the biggest win for Republican.
Unless you listen to Mike Lindell, but yes.
Yeah, but it was a very resounding win for him in a state that has always been very close, because he only won by like 33,000 votes 4 years ago. It was very close. So to see that change, is definitely, you are seeing that shift to more of a Republican state now, cemented. Not to say you're not going to have a good Democratic candidate in time that's going to be able to, especially statewide, flip it for the presidency again and everything. But it's definitely, he's definitely molded that state now into his image. And so he is a very strong contender to usurp Trump. And so it'll be interesting to see what the next couple months bring as far as him and Biden's, officially running for re-election and all that good stuff too.
Right. But Tamra, I think that's probably the fundamental problem for Democrats, because on the Republican side, the question can be, well, if not Trump, then who? Well, Ron DeSantis for starters. And then on the Democratic side, it's like, all right, well, if not Joe Biden, who? Oh boy. Does John Kerry want to run again?
Yeah.
Hey, Jimmy Carter could run again.
I said last
somebody
time.
Somebody talked Michelle Obama into it.
Yeah.
I'm going for Jimmy Carter.
And Tamra doesn't want to hear me say the name that I'm thinking right now of who might run.
I know who Christian got it this time.
You know what? Yeah. Well, how about Chelsea Clinton? All right. How about I mix it up a little bit?
How about Jimmy Carter, and then Hillary can be VP? He'll be 100. It'll be great,
Oh my gosh. Yeah, but he'd be like, "Look, I'll be president, but I have to keep building those houses for Habitat for Humanity." I mean,
you can't. Maybe Warren would try again. Maybe Pete Buttigieg would try again. Neither of them could make any sort of traction. It's unless we have some like dark horse candidate that's going to suddenly appear, it's just like who could that, who could it even be? Could it be I'm thinking, what's her name? I don't know.
Well, our friend Chelsea would say Oprah. If you remember, Scott,
yes.
How often Chelsea would say like Oprah should run for president, But
Oprah would actually, you know what? Maybe I'm going to start that campaign right now. I'm going to start, putting in my know-how that I've gained over the past year and start nudging Oprah to throw her hat into the ring. Just start giving little hints. Oprah, she just needs to start throwing out little crumbs of hints right now. And I think that would be a really excellent way to go.
Look, it's not like the primary start in a few weeks. It's still, it's
that's really the way that the Democrats should look at it. Trump was able to build the empire that he did, empire meaning his political empire, based on his branding, his marketing, and his branding. So we just need to, use that type of strategy and throw in Jamie Lee Curtis or one of these celebrities that is very like politically active, and get them, somebody who is very, well liked, but also is political, and get them to. That's honestly, now I'm getting excited. I'm like, okay, who?
Well, no, and I mean, and Jamie Lee Curtis would make sure there was Activia yogurt for everyone, and I think that would be.
Everybody needs healthy gut health,
That's true.
That works for everyone.
No one who couldn't use
that. She reaches across the aisle and hands out yogurt.
Yeah, well, it'll be something to keep an eye on, and our final topic for this evening is the place where you can keep an eye on this. Of course, so much of us still on Twitter, and it's interesting because this new era of Twitter was ushered in as a return of free speech, unless you're posting about the guy who spent $44 billion on it. And, look, you spend that kind of money on a company, you can make the changes you want, but it's wildly inconsistent over there on Twitter. Tamra, I know you're big on TikTok, but are you still keeping an eye on Twitter? And what are your thoughts?
Barely. Have my finger on the delete button on Twitter for even before Elon took over, just because of the fact that Twitter's just not my platform. It's just never.
Yeah.
Just never, given me that sweet spotlight that I need. But but especially now with things like the just as crazy as it's getting. I'm ready to delete it anytime now. But yeah, Elon. I'm just thinking like, oh God, if Elon was like, I'm putting my name in on the Democratic ticket, that would be like, oh no, how that was going to be. But he would actually probably do really well, is the sad part. So,
but except now he's a Republican, so I don't think
he's a Republican. But I'm just saying, like, strategy wise, he's a person that will, like Trump, will do anything for whatever type of title and attention he could get. So it's not beyond Elon to run on a Democratic ticket.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think a lot of what he does is on a whim, and I do think that we're seeing him to be, fairly thin-skinned, and I think the play that didn't go the way he expected it to was reinstating Trump, and Trump being like, nah, I got Truth Social. And I think that that probably tells me that there's some kind of exclusivity for Truth Social, so that he wasn't actually going to be able to, It was like, oh, I never thought I'd get reinstated in Twitter. I shouldn't have put that deal in there. But, it's all right. People, share his information on there enough. The one thing that's really come out of Twitter, and it makes me just wonder your thoughts, Scott, you and I haven't talked about this, the sort of the unraveling of the way that Twitter responded in relation to the story about Hunter Biden's laptop. Do you feel that Twitter and media outlets just felt like there wasn't enough of a story there, or were they so concerned that Trump would become president that they didn't want to even consider that there might be a real story and let's just bury it? Or do you think that they looked at it and they're like, okay, I don't really see much there, knowing what you know now?
I think that it lies somewhere in the middle there. I think there's there was the fear that Trump would win again, and I think there was a lot of like, let's not dig too deep on this. But I also think that there was some outlets that looked at it and was like, there's not enough of a story here. And the problem is, and we've talked about this briefly before in the previous, I don't know if it was back on one of the podcasts where we had talked about the fact the messenger was part of the problem. When you have like Rudy Giuliani going out, who has lost credibility, Where if it was somebody else that had brought some of the things, which is just the way it is in human nature anyways, there might have been more of a serious part of it taken. But also the differences with this story is this is a non-government official. Yes, they're related to the president or a presidential candidate at that time. And yes, that's a huge deal. But it's still not the same thing as someone, like we were saying before, like Trump family members who are working in the White House, who were also given a lot of crazy sweetheart deals. When you talk about Ivanka with China, and you talk about Jarrett with UAE and Saudi Arabia, and all these other deals that are going on that were also not necessarily done well, and they were actually working for the government technically. That's still a very big deal. But yes, I think that the issue lies somewhere in the middle. There was some of the fear of let's try to bury the story because we don't want it to become a thing. There were some that there's not enough there. But, you know, at the end of the day, the thing is like, yes, they can try to do whatever. I think it's a failing strategy for Republicans with the thin majority they have in the House to go after these type of things, because I don't think they're going to get very far. And it's not something that Americans voted for them to do, is to do all these other things or start impeaching people. But yeah, I do think there was probably, if there was more of a credible messenger than Rudy Giuliani at the time, there might have been more of a push to figure out what was there. But I'll still go back to saying this is not a government official or someone who was in the government. It's not President Biden. It wasn't someone directly that was involved with this. And that itself would have made it a bigger story than, you know, somebody related.
Right. It wasn't Joe Biden's laptop. It was Hunter Biden's. And,
right. Who's not running for office, who was not a government official, who never had been, who was not, you know, it's a very different thing.
But in so many ways, didn't it? I mean, I believe like the emails that were shared were just like so many of them with like shared by Republicans with damning information were emails talking about how what a loving father is and like used language
there was some of that
John Jr. and only wished that he ever heard from his father. So like so much of like supposed damning evidence, like it just makes Biden look really good.
No, but I mean, I get, and this is on both sides, there are access and things that people in a close circle or related to or whatever to a president or high government officials are going to have access to on both sides. And I get that there are things that where there can be improprieties, or there are other things that look to be conflicts or other because of what they're doing or what access they have. And is a very real thing. And that's going to happen. Yeah, it goes back to everything else we're talking about with people having spouses that are possibly getting insider stock because of knowing their spouse is going to vote on some piece of legislation or something. I mean, so you can see that happens everywhere. I'm not just saying the Hunter Biden's case and working with Burisma and what, you know, all the other things that are going on and Trump's kids and everything, but you can see that can happen a lot. And it's very difficult to find where that line is. But I really do think that there was a little bit of in between, like that story does lie a little bit in the middle, where there definitely was a concerted effort to try to tamp that down because of the fear of giving Trump any kind of, I think a lot of the media had learned giving Trump that platform in 2016 didn't work to their advantage. And so they did try to shut it down. But I also think they also probably shut it down because they didn't feel that there was enough there. And they learned the Hillary's emails issue from 2016 wasn't to the benefit of, you know, of society in general, by focusing on things that may not have been the thing, you know. And I think if they went down that path and realized it wasn't the big story, that it was going to not work in their benefit.
Well, on the same point, Tamra, do you feel like there were those in the media who needed the plausible deniability? It's sort of what I was saying before, that they're like, I can't look into that because if I find out that there's something to it, the journalistic integrity that's still deep inside me is going to make me run with the story that could actually, you know, take down the chances of Joe Biden being president. You know, do you think a media figure was just like, I'm just going to ignore it? It looks bad enough from the outside because there's Rudy Giuliani as the you know, the chocolate coating on the outside.
I don't
want to get to the creamy center. Yeah,
I really don't, because you know, even like journalists and journalists without integrity and journalists even with integrity, they just want what's going to be a headline and attention grabbing, and anything that Hunter Biden is culpable for, it's not enough that's going to get anybody really riled up, or any sort of, there's no there. So that's enough, that's juicy enough for any journalist to really care about it. So no, I don't think anybody was actually saying like, for the sake of my political party, I'm not going to touch this. I think if they weren't going to touch it, it was genuinely just because they knew that it wouldn't be a profitable headline.
Right. I mean, I think that there could be, individual reporters at outlets who might feel that way, but the top editors whose goals are to sell newspapers the old-fashioned way or the digital way, get those clicks, get those impressions, a story that would be salacious, a potential son of the president, son of the former vice president, regardless of what had happened. I think that if it had been a bigger story, maybe they would have run with it. I don't know. It is one that I wonder about, had it been able to play out, in real time, and if maybe they had put somebody other than Giuliani on the case,
right?
You had him peddling a laptop from hell, which just made it sound less scary, So
it was the whole thing is ridiculous. But as far as Twitter, I'm gonna keep riding it until it burns into the ground, because I
ride that horse till it's dead.
I'm with you. I'm the first chair violin on the band on the Titanic. I'm gonna be there. The water will be surrounding us. I'm gonna keep playing.
I'm just gonna keep just being there, seeing what's going on, and watch the craziness unfold. I'll be there.
Yeah. And but I'm also on Instagram at Christian DMZ. That's the important thing. That's the big takeaway. And Scott, if you're not on Twitter, how are you going to fight or make fun of Mitch?
I know.
It's like he's not on TikTok. He's gonna get Mastodon or Hive? I doubt it.
An old letter in the mail.
It's not
that's true. Just mail your congressman.
Exactly.
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of other stuff we could have talked about, but just wanted to touch on some of the big stories. We'll be back in 2023. I'm moving into a new house in January, so we'll see how soon in 2023 I'm ready to get the band back together. Still in Burbank, only about a mile from here, but more space, and I'll have my own above ground office, which will be it's converted in the back of a garage, but still it's above ground, even though I'm technically outside. So it should free things up once we're all settled. Thank you. So you know what? I'll have to say that I am better off than I was 4 years ago, because I'll have a nice house in Burbank instead of a townhouse. So but until then, of course, we want to wish Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, season's greetings, everything, and of course, Happy New Year to everyone. We always appreciate, especially the consistent tandem, the 1-2 punch of Storage Yard resident Sam Whitfield, and I know Jacob was in there earlier, along with a couple other people who popped in. So we always appreciate people who come along on this ride for us. But if people do want to continue to stay on Twitter and watch you interact with Mitch McConnell, Scott, where do they do that?
SMan80, that's SMan80.
And Tamra is all about the TikToks, but let people know.
Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram. Hey, Tamra.
Okay, so that's, and I'm, of course, at Christian DMZ. Please subscribe to the Blackcast YouTube channel. I know that this show has continued to have a very erratic schedule, but you'll know when it's going live if you subscribe to the YouTube channel. And this Friday, the 23rd, we'll have our big Blackcast Christmas Spectacular. So you can tune in for that live on the YouTube channel.
Can't wait to see Christian's high kicks.
I've been
practicing all year
on it. Yeah, it's the one time a year where I feel like it's all right to wear the high heels. In any case, we'll be back. Like as I said, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Christian DMZ. And thanks again to everybody. Thanks to Scott and Tamara and anybody else who's on the show in the over the course of the year. I know we had Royal Oaks. I know we had Drexel Hurd. I'm probably forgetting anybody else who's on, but I know the two of them were on a few times. And so we always appreciate anybody who joins us. And we look forward to seeing all of you in 2023, which will probably be even crazier than this year. So buckle up. We'll see you then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.